je suis Marie, pas Marie Antoinette, mais Marie Walker, et je suis le directeur du Centre éducatif et de mes visitor. I have always been fascinated by Marie Antoinette, and it's probably due to the fact that we have the same first name, Marie. So as a child, I thought, wow, there's a queen with my name. How cool is that? So I wanted to learn about this queen, this tragic figure in our history, as she was the last queen of France. But there's so much more to her than just being the last queen of France. And we're going to be looking into that today because she is a larger than life figure. She has become more myth than fact. There's lots of myths surrounding Marie Antoinette and the French Revolution. And we're going to try to debunk some of those today. Did she say, "Let them eat cake," one of her most famous quotes? No, she didn't. At least we do not have that anywhere documented. That seems to be made up to tarnish her reputation. And that's a lot of what we know about Marie Antoinette, is propaganda that was made up by revolutionaries for people to hate her. And they did a pretty good job. But she's also become this kind of tragic figure that has invoked a lot of sympathy. So throughout this presentation, we're going to be looking at the many sides of Marie Antoinette. We're going to dissect her a little bit and see if we can see the person of Marie Antoinette from this mythic historical figure that she has become. We're also going to ask questions like, did she have a part in causing the environment which resulted in the French Revolution, thereby having a hand in the demise of the monarchy as well as her own death? We'll find out. We're going to look at some evidence and make some educated assumptions, which we call being a historian. We're also going to look and see if she did indeed have a hand in the demise of the monarchy. Well, then I guess you could say, well, she had a hand in her own fate, but was she in fact a victim of circumstances that were just beyond her control, just put into this environment, rather helpless to the swirling revolution that was maybe already in place before she even got there? We'll find out. So as I said, there's very many different sides to Marie Antoinette, and we are going to start with the first Marie Antoinette in her native Austria, where she was born on November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna. Her name at birth was Maria Antonia Josepha. So already we have Marie by a different name. She becomes Marie Antoinette when she moves to France. Growing up, she was Maria. And she was the 15th child of Francis I, the Holy Roman Emperor, and her mother, Maria Theresa. And she grew up in the palace of Schönbrunn, and she, from all accounts, had a very happy childhood. Her and her many brothers and sisters growing up in this palace, they had no wants. They were the children of the Holy Roman Emperor at a time when the Holy Roman Emperor and the empire, which wasn't actually a empire, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but they called it that. It's marketing. But anyhow, that aside, they were doing good. They were doing pretty good in the 1750s. I mean, she had a suite of 5 rooms. What child has a suite of 5 rooms? She was doing fine. And from all accounts, she loved music and she was a good dancer. And she even got to hear Mozart play when she was 8 years old. How cool is that? To have like Mozart come and do a private concert at your palace. And now while she loved music and from like the arts, she wasn't really interested in other academic subjects. She was not considered a good student or a scholar, but she did enjoy arts and culture. Now, during her childhood, while she had a very happy childhood, the 7 Years' War was going on. Now, in the United States, we call the 7 Years' War the French and Indian War because that's kind of the focus that we have in America, is what's going on in America, which was the French and the Native Americans who were fighting the English here on this continent. But the 7 Years' War was really the first World War. It got a lot of different countries in Europe involved, and that's why it's called the 7 Years' War. The American version is called the French and Indian War, but it's all the same thing. It's the world at war from 1756 to 1763. And while the 7 Years' War did not really affect Marie Antoinette personally at the time, it did have an influence on the world around her, and it would later have an influence on her more directly. As France and Austria, who were traditional enemies, actually fought together against Prussia. And while that turned out pretty good for them, at least for Austria, France blamed Austria for getting them involved in the first place and then making them lose money in this war, which did not make the French like the Austrians any more than they already did, which was not much. They were traditional enemies. Yet, because of this, in an act of marital diplomacy, we see Marie Antoinette, the Dauphine, as she marries Louis XVI of France. And this is an act of marital diplomacy between Austria and France, trying to make relations a bit better between the two of them because it wasn't great. So we see this marriage of these two very young people being an act of, well, politics. It is international policy. In the olden days, it's marrying your children off to each other so that your families don't fight. We'll see how that works. Didn't always work out for everybody. But like I was saying, these are very, very young children. Marie Antoinette got married when she was just 14 years old to Louis Auguste of France, who was just 15 at the time. They had not met each other before they got married. It was just really an alliance for the countries. And they were married on May 16th, 1770, so not too long after the 7 Years' War ends. And this wedding was a big, extravagant ceremony. When you think France during the 1700s, you think it begins with the court of the Sun King and Louis XIV at Versailles. And Versailles is the home of the French monarchy throughout the 1700s. Versailles is nothing if a symbol of extravagance and wealth and prestige for the monarchy. France at this time is a powerhouse. This big extravagant wedding ceremony between Marie Antoinette and Louis Auguste of France takes place. Big party, but then it's followed by the bedding. So that is a custom in which the families lead the married people to their bed, and then they kind of tuck them into bed and are like, all right, go do the marriage thing to, consummate and officiate their own marriage, which, as you can imagine, would be very awkward. And according to all accounts, they did not officiate their own marriage. They did not consummate their marriage, which led to some questions, which will be continuously brought up throughout this presentation. But Marie Antoinette, she was always thought of as this Austrian outsider when she got to France. So she was not accepted in France. She was not accepted into the French court. She was always kind of, thought of this Austrian woman. That's literally what they would call her. It's just, oh, well, that's the Austrian woman. She was their princess, and they were just like, the Austrian woman. Like, they were very, stuck up and snooty and just did not want to accept her as part of their court. All the courtiers and just, people in the country. Which was really, really hard for her because, first off, you have that rejection of this country that you came to, but you also had left everything behind to come to this country. She left behind her family. She left behind her clothes. She wasn't allowed to bring Austrian clothes. It had to be all French clothes. There was this whole ceremony at the border of the two countries where she was exiting Austria and then entering France, and she had to take off her Austrian clothes and put on the French clothes. She couldn't even bring her pet dog because apparently her pet dog was too Austrian. So she was always regarded with this otherness of being Austrian rather than French. And also with suspicion, because Austria and France had been traditional enemies. So even within this court that she has come to basically rule, she is thought of as not one of them. After the marriage and the whole bedding fiasco, there was some problems with producing an heir, because there were problems in the marriage bed. Pamphlets went around the country, mind you. Printing presses were kind of like the internet of their day where rumors spread and tabloids could kind of come up. And one of them was, can the king do it? That's a question that was being spread all around the country. Her one job is to produce an heir, which wasn't happening. So you have this othered, ostracized Austrian woman who has come to this court, who is not being accepted, and then she's basically failing at her one job because it takes two to make a child. While some of the pamphlets are questioning, can the king do it? So not all the blame was being placed on her in particular, except her mom. Her mom was definitely blaming her and was definitely sending her a lot of really angry, ranty letters, which again, cannot make someone feel good about themselves. So that goes on for a while. And Marie Antoinette is the Delphine, as she is married to the Dauphin, who is the crown prince of France, the one who is going to become king when the king dies. So Marie Antoinette does eventually become queen, even though she has for a long time struggled with fitting in at the French court and also French court etiquette, because there were rules that governed just about everything. And she is coming into this. Of course, she would have studied and people would have, tutored her in how to do things in the French court, but it does not come naturally to her. And that is very difficult for her to learn how literally everything is done, because there are rules for everything. But in 1774, she ascends the throne with her husband upon the death of Louis XV. At the time, Marie Antoinette was 19 years old and her husband, the new king, was 20. So they had been married for about 5 years, and now, barely 20, they're ruling France, one of the most powerful nations on continental Europe. That has to be scary. They actually wept upon hearing the news. They were not excited to become the king and queen. Of course, they were weeping because, Louis XV had died, and they were upset about that, but they were also scared and did not feel like they were ready to become the king and queen at such a young age. But what Marie Antoinette was good at was being a fashion icon. She loved extreme hairstyles. She loved having a big wardrobe. She did not invent these things per se. She did not invent these extreme hairstyles, and she didn't, come up with the idea that, nobles should have a lot of clothes. Those are things that have already been happening. But Marie Antoinette did add to this extravagance. She made the hairstyles that were bigger. People had a lot of clothes. She had more. And therefore, we still have this idea of Marie Antoinette being this fashion icon to this day, because she was such a trendsetter at court. So eventually she does kind of find her place at court as she becomes queen. She's looked at as, she is the queen now. She's not just the princess. Like, you cannot mess with her anymore, to put it in a more blunt terms. She is the queen, and even if you don't like the queen, she's queen. So what she says goes. You are going to want to emulate what she does if you are a courtier, because you want to get into her favor, because she has a lot of power now. At least socially. Politically, she has no power. But socially, in the court, has a lot. Now, after Marie Antoinette and Louis become king and queen, 4 years later, in 1778, Marie Antoinette gives birth to her first child, Marie Theresa, who of course is named after her mother, Maria Theresa. And it's a girl, it's a nice, healthy girl, but because it's the 1700s, there was not as much excitement because it was a girl and not a boy, because they wanted a boy to rule and become king. So Marie Antoinette and Louis, they try again to have another child, and they do in 1781. And this time it is a boy, Louis Joseph. And Louis XVI, he wept tears of joy throughout the baptism because he was so excited to have a boy. He basically had secured his line in his mind is, I've done it. I've done the one thing that, the king and queen are supposed to do. And that is to secure your legacy, to secure that the throne has an heir. And that was going to be their son, Louis Joseph. But the child was sickly and ended up dying at just 7 years old. Of course, before the death of Louis Joseph, they actually had another son in 1785 named Louis Charles, who was a very strong and healthy boy, and upon the death of his older brother, Louis Joseph, became the crown prince, the heir apparent. But throughout the 1770s, debts were piling up. So while everyone's really happy, the king and queen, they're having kids, that's great. France is going to be secure. We have, heirs that are going to step up and take the throne. There are also a lot of these debts that are piling up. And it was not looking good for the coffers and France. Marie Antoinette, she was very much told not to get into politics and was very much kept out of politics because even upon their marriage, Louis was told, don't listen to your wife about politics. Do not have her involved in politics because you don't want it to look like the Austrians are interfering. They were scared that Marie Antoinette would be this Austrian influence into the French politics, and because the French didn't like the Austrians, they did not want her to be involved. And it couldn't even look like she was involved. There, closed door things, nothing. So what does that leave a queen to do? It leaves the queen to, be a social person because her political influence is totally dashed. She can't do anything about that, so she's going to be wholly involved in the social sphere. So she, of course, was involved with fashion of the court and French court fashion, setting trends. She was also the one to arrange social events at the court. So she was really in charge of social events and fashion trends. So she liked organizing social events because that was one of the things that she could do. So gambling at card games and going for walks out in the garden of Versailles. I think she did attempt to have an ice skating party, but then people didn't like that because they thought it was too Austrian. Her wardrobe, of course, expands. I think that's one of the ways that she felt like she could express herself. During this time, we also have Le Petit Trianon, which is basically its own tiny palace, which Louis gave to Marie. There's a palace to it. There's a nice, very, very nice mansion there. But then there's also this village that she had built that was kind of a fantasy land version of the French countryside, which you would really go to for privacy. So we have this idea in modern culture about Marie Antoinette being this shepherdess, that she decided to go dress up like a shepherdess and play peasant at Le Petit Trianon. That's not actually how this happened. Of course, she did have Le Petit Trianon. It does kind of look like this romanticized version of a village. She would go there for privacy, so much so that she had mirrored panels that could be raised to cover the windows because she felt like she had no privacy at all in the court of Versailles. People come to dress her in the mornings. She does not get to be by herself. She's constantly being watched. She's constantly being critiqued, criticized, and she just wants to have a moment away. And at Le Petit Trianon, we have the Queen's Hamlet, which is kind of that Disneyland version of a French medieval town, which is kind of this fantasy escape, and where she was kind of accused of playing peasant. She did not, though, and she did not dress up as shepherdess. It was just a pretty place for her and her friends to go to be away from court. Now, she did wear this very scandalous dress called the chemise à la reine, which basically means the underclothes of the queen, because the chemise it's a shirt. In French, it translates to shirt, but it's what you wear under your dress. Basically looked like she was just out wearing her underclothes and not wearing a proper dress. So that might be where we get the idea of her dressing up as a peasant, because the chemise à la reine is very simple compared to the extravagant clothes that we generally associate with Marie Antoinette. That kind of adds to her whole reputation of like this almost airhead queen who just did not know about what was going on around her, who did not care and didn't care about the people that she was queen of, and just wanted to go have fun and wear pretty dresses and hang out with her friends and, you know, live in this extravagant palace and this kind of romanticized version of a medieval town, and then just not pay attention to reality at all. And perhaps one of the worst scandals that really made a lot of people upset and damaged the reputation of the monarchy pretty much forever in France is the affair of the diamond necklace. So it begins in 1785. At least the affair does. But the necklace itself goes back even further. The diamond necklace and the French family, they have a much longer history together because it was commissioned by Louis XV in 1772 for Madame du Barry, his mistress. But Louis XV died before the necklace was finished. Therefore, he never actually gave it to Madame du Barry, and the jewelers kind of just got stuck with it. So Louis XVI, he did offer it to Marie Antoinette on a couple of occasions, saying like, hey, do you want this necklace? Like, my grandfather commissioned it. Do you want it? It's really nice. And she refused it a couple of times, and we aren't necessarily sure why she refused it, but the most likely reason is because she hated Madame du Barry. So why would you want a necklace that was made for someone you hate? But what we do know is that she definitely refused it on a couple occasions. But the jewelers who ended up getting stuck with this necklace, this incredibly expensive necklace, like insanely expensive necklace. It is worth $15.1 million in today's money. It almost bankrupted this jeweler company. It had 647 diamonds in this necklace. It took them a really long time to make it because they had to find 647 diamonds. The jewelers were not happy that they ended up getting stuck with this necklace and that the queen was refusing it, who was pretty much the only person in the country who had enough money to actually buy the necklace. So, enter onto the sea the Cardinal de Rohan, who had began exchanging letters with the queen. Or at least he thought so. He, of course, as his title suggests, was a cardinal in the church. And also was, I believe, he was involved with Marie Antoinette's family back in Austria as well. I think he was like a diplomat to Austria from the French court. And Marie Antoinette actually did not really like him. And she definitely didn't after this whole diamond necklace affair thing. So it seems strange that she would begin sending him letters. But he was flattered that the queen would think of him and send him these letters, and they began this correspondence. And he began to believe through these letters that she wanted the necklace, but that she just didn't want the king to know because of the whole like debts piling up for the last decade thing. So she wanted the necklace, but she didn't want her husband to know, so she wanted the cardinal to get the necklace for her, and then she would just, pay him back. And then also the cardinal began to think that Marie was actually in love with him, which is just a whole made-up thing for his head. So he had his mistress arrange a meeting between Marie Antoinette and himself, which that seems like a very strange love triangle going on there, but it happened. So anyway, his mistress arranged for a meeting between Marie Antoinette and the cardinal in the gardens of Versailles at night. So the cardinal ended up meeting with a woman who he thought was Marie Antoinette, but it definitely was not. It was dark, and his mistress had found this woman named Nicole de Guy d'Olivet, who looked a whole lot like the queen, and in the dark with, a cape on, perhaps you would think she's the queen, especially when you haven't really met the queen all that much. You just know of the queen and kind of know what she looks like. So therefore, he thinks he's meeting with Marie Antoinette, the queen, when in fact he is actually meeting with a prostitute who just looks a whole lot like the queen. And in this meeting, Nicole tells the cardinal again about how much she would like this diamond necklace and how it would be great if he got it for her. So he's like, yes, I'll get it for you, and I love you, and that, yeah, it's the whole thing. So, as you can tell, this is not going to end well, because it's being orchestrated by Jeanine de la Motte, who is, well, a con artist first, but also the cardinal's mistress. And she's the one who's been sending these letters. She's the one who arranged the meeting. And she's kind of acting as the go-between between the cardinal and the queen, which is actually another lady from court who she just got to, like, impersonate Marie Antoinette's handwriting. But she did all this because she had been approached by the jewelers who wanted to help selling the necklace to Marie Antoinette. And she saw this as a fantastic time to make some very fast cash and eventually arrange to get it to where she had a letter from Marie Antoinette, who it was not actually Marie Antoinette. It was just all forged, and it was forged rather poorly. The queen, on the letter, the queen signed her last name, which the French nobles never did. It was etiquette. The French etiquette, there's so much French etiquette for the court. That was one of the things that you just never get. They did not. So this letter had the last name, but the Cardinal de Rohan did not process that these are being forged and there were obvious errors in it. He just was not thinking, obviously. So he went with this letter that said, I want the diamond necklace and I'm Marie Antoinette and I will pay you back. Here's my promissory note kind of situation. So he went to the jewelers. He got the necklace. He then gave it to his mistress to give to Marie Antoinette, but his mistress never actually gave it to Marie Antoinette because she doesn't know her. She ended up taking the necklace herself, cutting it to bits, and selling off the diamonds on the black market. Up until this point, it seems like she's doing a really good job of scamming everybody. But she got caught when the jewelers complained to Marie Antoinette directly about not getting paid. To which Marie Antoinette replied, "What? I never did that. That's not my signature. You know it's not my signature because I never signed my last name. How dare you?" Cardinal de Rohan, his mistress, they go on trial. The mistress, she ends up getting imprisoned for life. She gets flogged. She gets branded, literally branded, because that's what they did. Cardinal de Rohan, they took pity on him because he's a cardinal and he's, a noble. But he was not branded for life, flogged, or imprisoned for life. So as you can tell, Marie Antoinette had literally nothing to do with this except helping catch these people that had scammed the jewelers. But in the court of public opinion, Marie Antoinette had a lot to do with it. Some people actually believe that it was Marie Antoinette who was writing to the cardinal. That it was Marie Antoinette who actually was just being this selfish, greedy person who wanted this pretty diamond necklace, who didn't care that, France was going broke and people were starving. She wanted the pretty sparkly object. But that's not true. She had refused it on multiple occasions, and these letters were being forged because it was a whole scam operation that had absolutely nothing to do with her. But the French people didn't believe that. So in the court of public opinion, Marie Antoinette was also branded Madame Deficit, which is this term that was just hissed at her when she rode her carriage through the streets, and people became vehemently opposed to the monarchy and this ideal of them just being this all-powerful, luxurious community of nobles, while they themselves were suffering and had a really bad harvest and were starving. So then we get to see Marie Antoinette in a different light. She's Madame Deficit, but then she also becomes Citizen Marie Capet. Because, of course, during the French Revolution, titles go away. Everyone is just citizen. And Capet is that last name that was being used to sign those forged documents that would never be used if she was queen. Of course, she was never actually known about that. I have just named this revolutionary side of Marie Antoinette Marie Capet, and I think I'm witty. So, The French Revolution begins in 1798, which is a really fun date to remember because it's 798. And that begins with the storming of the Bastille, the French prison, which kind of represented this castle-like monarchy, the monarch telling you what to do. So they stormed that, let out a few prisoners, and the French Revolution begins. This happens after a particularly bad harvest that had left a lot of the French starving. Like, they didn't have bread to eat. There were literal bread riots because people wanted flour to make bread, because bread was a staple in their diet, which was not there anymore. And of course, that means the price of bread then rose drastically because of the whole supply and demand situation. So either they didn't have bread physically, or they didn't have enough money to actually buy bread, because also the economy was not doing great. And these peasants, who literally could not eat or buy bread, resented so much the lavish lifestyle that they believed the nobility had, which they definitely did. And who represented that lavish lifestyle? Marie Antoinette. The woman who they thought wanted this diamond necklace while they were starving. This woman who is so preoccupied with clothes and fashion and social occasions while they are just trying to farm and survive. So this resentment of the monarchy builds until a mob attacks Versailles in October of 1798, when market women from Paris demanded bread. It was a bread riot that had started in Paris. They then walked all the way from their homes to Versailles, which is outside of Paris. Miles. They walked miles because they wanted Marie Antoinette. They wanted Marie Antoinette's head. But they did not get Marie Antoinette. She actually escaped down a secret staircase just in the nick of time, and then a mob destroyed her room. Now, Marie Antoinette at this point could have fled to Austria. She could have gone back home and said, you know what, this country, it's never really liked me. They've made that quite clear. I'm just going to go back and live with Mom in Austria. But she didn't. She stayed with her husband in France, which shows while it wasn't a love match in the beginning, they did have a great fondness for each other, and I dare say it grew to be a love, a mutual respect and bonding that they shared. She stays with her children and her husband in France. But the Tuileries did make the royal family move from Versailles to Paris. This idea that, oh, well, now the monarchy, they're actually in Paris. They're here with us. They can see what's going on, the day-to-day, our struggle, versus being in Versailles, which is had started as this hunting retreat away from the city, away from the city's problems, so that they didn't have to, really witness what was going on. At least that was in the mind of the people, is now they're here, now they'll see and they can fix it, or they'll do something. But really, that's not what happened. Basically, the royal family was imprisoned in their medieval palace that was in Paris and held there. The French Revolution, it's an incredibly bloody, complicated affair, and I'm not going to get into all of the complexities of that today because we're going to be focusing on Marie Antoinette. But there was a lot of people striving for power, and the monarchy was losing. The monarchy was definitely losing power, to the point where the monarchy actually went on trial. There were people who were in favor of no, the monarchy can stay, we can leave them there. They'll, kind of act as a head, and then they can rule with the people. We'll be more like England. We'll have a parliament, and the king will, listen to us more. It won't be an absolute monarchy. So there were people who were like, no, we can't do that. We have to get rid of the king. We're going to be a republic. We're going to be a democracy. I mean, there were just lots of different ideas because this was a revolution that just kind of happened. It wasn't exactly well planned. Several years into this revolution, in 1793, the royal family goes on trial for crimes real and made up. So Louis XVI goes on trial first. He was executed for treason to France on January 21st, 1793. And Marie Antoinette went into very deep mourning for her husband. She refused to eat. She was already ill herself, possibly with a type of cancer, but she was devastated by his death and knew that this is the end. There's no hope for the monarchy anymore. Like, she doesn't know what's going to happen to her. She doesn't know what's going to happen to her children, but it's not going to be good. And her trial then began on October of that same year, in 1793. Her charges are a bit ridiculous. She was charged with sending millions of dollars to Austria and of also sexually abusing her son, which she took great offense to, as any parent would. And she actually said upon that charge, she was kind of just enduring the other charges of just like, okay, just this is what they're going to say about me. This is what's going on. And was rather resigned to her fate. But when they accused her on that charge, she stood up and said, nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother. So they kind of backed off on that charge a bit. But they still found her guilty on other accounts and executed her on October 16th of 1793. As she's carted through the streets. Her husband had been given this the privilege of being in a coach, a very royal, dignified death. He had read the account of Charles I, who was executed during, kind of ended the English Civil War. He read that account of, how Charles I, he went bravely to his death. He went bravely to his execution. He actually asked for a second shirt because the day was chilly and he didn't want to appear like he was shivering, because he wanted to appear very calm and serene and meeting his death with dignity. And Louis XVI did that. Marie Antoinette was put in a common criminal's cart. She was carted through the streets with people jeering at her. She had her locks chopped off, ironically by the same hairdresser who helped her create those elaborate hairstyles in the beginning, and just a cruel circular irony. So she is intentionally humiliated. And as she's being led up to the guillotine, she accidentally steps on her executioner's foot, and she apologizes to him, which doesn't sound like a bratty, snooty person to me. So she dies. Her head is chopped off with a French guillotine at only 38 years old. Now, that is the death of Marie Antoinette the person, but Marie Antoinette the myth lives on. Of course, she's a hated figure in France for a very long time, except for like a very small section of the population who are monarchists, who are not going to be talking about it. We're not going to be vocal about that, right, during the revolution, especially the whole reign of terror situation, because you would end up getting killed yourself if you had voiced, I liked Marie Antoinette. What a great queen. But there is still this idea of Marie Antoinette being this larger-than-life figure and becoming this mythic figure after her death. A lot of blame being placed on her for the revolution, for France's problems. She's really this scapegoat. And as she is this figure that's still a public figure, a very public name that people know, well, over time, the next couple 100 years, perhaps we start to see a more sympathetic version of Marie Antoinette. There are several movies that were made in America about Marie Antoinette, of course, movies starting in the early 1900s. So the first film we have about Marie Antoinette was made in 1938, and it starred Norma Shearer, who was actually nominated for an Oscar for her role. But this didn't just focus on Marie Antoinette. It was a family drama between Marie Antoinette and her husband and all of their problems that they had, which were numerous, especially in the beginning. A couple of decades later, jumping forward, we have Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, starring Michelle Morgan. And this movie depicts Marie Antoinette as a human rather than this character or caricature of this idea of Marie Antoinette. Now, jumping forward to the 2000s, we have the movie Marie Antoinette in 2006, which stars Kirsten Dunst. And I describe this movie as basically Clueless in the Court of Versailles. It's such an early 2000s movies. I find it incredibly interesting because it kind of portrays Marie Antoinette as a modern day celebrity. with 80s music as the soundtrack. Like, how fun is that, right? So it has this bring Marie Antoinette into the modern era and asking us kind of the question, I mean, she's a celebrity. Like, what do you expect from a celebrity who is really interested in fashion and culture and having fun? If you haven't seen it, I do recommend. Now, in my own opinion, in my own historian's opinion, because we have the same name and I've had a fascination with her since childhood, I have some sympathy for Marie Antoinette. I think we see her trying really hard to be a good queen. But at some point along the way, she realized that no matter what she did, she was always going to be that Austrian outsider, regarded with suspicion, with malice intent, perhaps. So she was always going to be this other person. So what was the point in trying? What was the point in trying to fit in and trying to be a good queen? She had tried that and it wasn't working. So why not just enjoy herself? Why not take in and utilize all of the privileges that where she found herself in life being, Queen of France had to offer? So why not retreat to a fictional paradise where she could escape these roles that she had been put into, that had been put upon her? Why not create some roles for herself? So I think Marie Antoinette does not completely escape blame for the French Revolution, but I do think she was a scapegoat that a lot of other people put their problems upon, and she was unfairly blamed for a lot of things because she was that young woman, that Austrian outsider. So it made it really easy to make her the villain, to make her the problem. Oh, it's not us French. Us French are doing great. It's the Austrians. It's always the Austrians. Those are our traditional enemies, and now we have one being queen. Can't trust her, which I hope in this presentation you learned a little bit more about Marie Antoinette, her role, her many roles, what was more fact, what has been more fiction in this myth of Marie Antoinette. And also, I hope you stay tuned and are subscribed to our Then Again podcast, because we are going to be having an interview about Marie Antoinette with Dr. Desan, and I will be asking her about, well, was Marie Antoinette's extravagant unusual for her status at the time? Was she just the scapegoat? And also, where does the line "let them eat cake" even come from if it didn't actually come from Marie Antoinette? So in a broader sense, I think Marie Antoinette shows us how women are treated and how women are kind of put into these roles that have been created by them for society, and how perhaps we need to dig a little bit deeper to see what they are actually, what the real people beneath these myths and legends that history creates are. So until next time, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. See ya.